I'm Gord Burtch. I'm assistant professor at Carlson. And if you attended this workshop 2 years ago, you would have seen me present our curriculum redesign at that time that Ravi and I did 3 years ago, and I co-taught it with him the first run. It went well, so then he let me run it after that on my own. I know to the next. So this is our core MBA IT management course. It's quite similar to what Florin was describing a moment ago. In terms of the objective, this is pulled right from our advertisement of what this course is about for the students. And like everybody so far has been saying, the objective is, make the point that digital is what's happening, your world is turbulent, you need to figure something out or you're not going to survive, and we're going to help you figure that out. So it's strategic frameworks for managing in this space, and also some hands-on tools that either you need to understand what they can do so you can tell somebody else to do it, and the best way to make you understand that is probably to have you do a little bit of it yourself, right? So there's some hands-on tool components that we expose them to as well. So I'm not, as Florin said, I'm not going to spend a ton of time going into the very details of every single module in this course. It is a 7-week course, 14 sessions, so twice a week. So it's, again, rapid fire, and we have to get through it fast. So it's a bit of a survey course, sort of how is IT disrupting and sort of changing society and the economy, and how do you manage as a result of that. So we start off with disruption. What I have been using thus far to highlight this is this idea of pairing ride-sharing and autonomous vehicles, and having the students think through in real time in discussion, what are the cascading implications of that across all these different industries. And as they start hearing one another talk about, like, we don't need parking garages anymore, and what's going to happen to auto insurance, and what's going to happen to auto mechanics, and what's going to happen to car dealerships, and what's going to happen to trucking, and they kind of go through and they realize the massive implications of one technological change. And that kind of sets the stage for them to start thinking, like, I don't want to swear, I was about to swear. But that's what they're thinking, right? And that kind of starts off there, and then the rest of the course is all about thinking of sort of technologies and strategies and ideas that can help you adapt in that space in light of that, right? So, as I said, it's a 14-session course. We have 2 exams baked in there that take up 2 of those sessions, so it's really short. So what I'm going to highlight, I don't want to go through this in a lot of detail, but we transition from there right into thinking about, what is one ideal strategy we might want to use to deal with this? Well, can we think about platform strategies as a disruptor to an industry, but also as a way of surviving disruption to an industry? I used to only teach 1 module on this. I last year expanded this into 2 separate modules because I think it's super important, obviously, and it also helped that Marshall has produced all this material that we can use, which has been super great. I then transitioned to doing some hands-on data mining stuff, so I use R for this. I'm debating that. I'm going to come back to that in a second, whether I want to continue doing that. Thinking about data as an asset and a source of competitive advantage, and strategic implications of data and information architecture. And then in the second half, we do get into digital search and advertising, social media, social networks, some of the same stuff Florin was describing a second ago. I spend a fair amount of time on crowdsourcing because that's my bread and butter, and I just enjoy teaching it because it's easy for me to teach it, because it's my research. And then we wrap up with kind of a new business models thing. I modify this every year. I just kind of bake in stuff that's going on right now in the economy to keep it interesting for students. So I started off with sharing economy, but I also more recently have gotten more heavily into blockchain and implications of that for different industries like audit and stuff, because that's interesting to a lot of our students to understand what's happening right now. And then I finish up with a review. So this is the structure of the class. I've been trying to figure out some digital participation components, so we've been using YellowDig. I don't know if we're continuing to do so going forward. This is a tool that was developed by Sean Roy, who some of you may have met, which is a useful sort of social media component outside of class. I was actually pleasantly surprised. I went on to pull this screenshot just before yesterday to make these slides, and I realized, even though my class ended 7 weeks ago, some of my students are actually still talking to each other on that platform. They continue the discussion without my knowledge. I went back and there's like 100 posts that are additionally posted there. I was sort of taken aback that they'd continued the conversation. And I have some other participation stuff I do there. Online exams to make it fast, and then 3 assignments. The new one that I added this past year, which is again because I think the platform stuff is super important, is what I've called it pipes to platforms. So right after I teach this into a QuickBooks case that Marshall recommends as part of this notion of how do you transition from a pipe business model to a platforms business model, which is about Intuit and their platforms around QuickBooks and Quicken. I have them start thinking over the course of the remainder of the semester, can you identify a business that's currently operating under a pipe business model that might be ripe for disruption and conversion into a platform business model? And it forces them to really think about and understand what does that mean, that shift, right? How does it mean that you should be operating? And how do I sort of think about what that transition would imply in terms of how will I structure my market? How open will it be on various sides? How will I price? All the stuff we talk about there, okay? And they have the whole duration of the course to work on that as a group to figure it out, and that's sort of their last assignment they submit back to me. These are some of the tools I'm using right now. It's a lot of stuff. So I just got the MBA Most Innovative Faculty Award because they liked all the tools we're using in this class, making it very digital. So like I said, we have YellowDig, we use VoiceThread, so every time they submit a solution, it is a presentation, but it doesn't happen in class. They make a virtual presentation that they submit back to me, where they sort of narrate over slides, and they do it remotely. We have our review courses sort of Jeopardy style, which they enjoy, that's entertaining. For them, where they're working in groups and answering. We use Slack for TA support outside of class, so it's sort of live interaction. This can be good or bad. If you get in the habit of responding to a student's question at 1 in the morning, they expect you to do it after that, but that's my wife's problem right now. And then
Danger Will Robinson.
yeah, no, she's not going to watch this. And then we're using R right now for the bulk of the analytics component. So this is competing in a data-driven digital age, right? So that data-driven piece is a little bit different than the J's course name. The main difference here is that every single module, I try to give them a hands-on data set that they actually do some analysis with, which is tied to the context that they've been looking at in that particular module.
More quick, how does VoiceThread differ from like voice over PowerPoint?
I mean, it's actually a platform itself. So this is a tool that integrates with Moodle and other things that the university has a subscription to. They log in. They can work all remotely, separately from one another, and narrate over individual slides and stitch them together, and then submit it back to me, and they share it with me and the TA.
No, I did the same thing with PowerPoint, but this looked better.
Yeah, so this is purely virtual. This is, yeah. And they don't have to use slides with that, actually, if they don't want to. Okay, so this is sort of, that's where we are. So I'm going to, like Lauren was doing, I'm going to highlight a couple of things that I'm doing that I think are particularly helpful. And as Abby is focusing on things I can take away and use myself. So number one, how do I stitch all this stuff together at the outset? I have an introductory reading that I found to be pretty, fairly prescient and useful, and the students put stock in it because it's written by Boston Consulting Group, and it's a possible employer for a lot of them that are interested in consulting. So this BCG Perspectives article, which is somewhat long, but it talks about the digital disruption and what does that mean for the world and strategy. And they talk about waves of digital disruption, like Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and now we're on Wave 3, which is all about hyperscaling, which really what it is it's not just platforms, it's platform ecosystems. And they go through a lot of the examples of Amazon about scaling up its platform ecosystem and how it's hard to compete with, and it's eating the world and taking over everything. And they talk about other things that, strategic components and capabilities that help you survive in this third wave of digital disruption, and they talk about a number of the different things that we're actually covering in this course. And this wasn't the framework for designing this class. This was just, in retrospect, happened to align with everything we were already doing. So it's useful as an intro reading for the students to be able to sort of start thinking about how all these things are going to connect together, and not just see them as random modules that have been thrown together for them to learn about. All right? It actually is somewhat coherent for them from the outset as a result of this. So this is one thing I would really recommend people take a look at. And the other thing, which is very recent, so I got some grant money to develop with one of my RAs, some R packages that are designed for sort of distance-based learning. So a big thing with R, if you're new to this, and a lot of the MBAs are, syntax and things becomes a bit of a problem, especially if they don't have programming experience. So what Swirl is, and I'm going to give you a brief demonstration of what it looks like in a second. These are custom command line interactive-based courses that you can make yourself. Okay, is a library called Swirl, and there's a website called Swirl Stats, where other people have developed modules already that you can sort of install for free and work with. And what it is it walks you through step by step. Do this. So do a data import now. And typically I wouldn't use this as the first step in teaching somebody. This is generally, you've already learned this in class, now you're going to go home and try it yourself, but you're still not really on your own. You're still getting some feedback, and it's pointing out errors in your syntax and helping you figure that out independently. It sort of offloads some of that work from the instructor or the TA a bit, and kind of walks them through an analysis. So I have 6 or 7 of these modules now that are in somewhat rough shape, and the reason I say they're rough is that catching the difference in tactical errors and giving an informative error message is still not necessarily there, and that just takes time to develop. But they will get there. So I'm using this, I'm planning to use this as an introductory one that's provided by Swirl Stats for our, using R, the basic version And then I'm using my own self-developed ones for basic analytic tools like association rules and cluster analysis and stuff like that. To start with the MBAs in the core, and by the way, I use this as a feeder into the elective I teach on analytics for MBAs, the evening class, where they do this stuff much more in depth in R. Okay, so I'll show you this in a minute. I've got 5 minutes left, so we'll see how much time I'm left with. Okay, so this is supposed to be, as it says in the program, an update on our core curriculum. So sort of, these are some issues and changes that I'm currently thinking about and trying to deal with. So the number one issue we're facing right now is, even though I've been using R this far, unsurprising, this is likely to be unsurprising to everybody, there are a lot of students that love it. So these are more tech-minded students, that they're actually getting some exposure to this, and they know that some, the recruiters that they're targeting care about this stuff. And by the way, those recruiters aren't just Amazon. That's also a lot of the consulting firms these days, like Bain and McKinsey and stuff, want these skills. But trying to figure out how to reconcile this. So my my sales pitch to the students at the outset, when I tell them this is what we're going to be using, and they kind of get a little scared. Number one, I tell them I'm never at any point evaluating them on their ability to write R syntax. This is purely to get them exposed to this. Number two, it's free. It's platform agnostic, so they can take it to any employer they go to, whether that employer is currently using it or not. So it's going to be useful to them no matter what. And number three, it is actually in pretty high use. So it's commonly used by a number of large companies these days. In contrast to some of these other options, particularly Excel Miner, which we were using previously, which is an Excel plugin. It's easy from the perspective that it's point and click and it's plugged into Excel, which most of them already know. The downside is there isn't a single employer in the world that I've ever heard of that uses this. It's also heavily kind of constrained in its functionality and what it can do. It's constrained by the constraints of Excel. A million rows, that's about it, right? Which isn't really what these algorithms are designed to handle. If they can do more than that. So there's a lot of downsides. So I try and make that sales pitch to them. I'm relatively effective most of the time, but the bigger issue right now is how are we going to consolidate tools across courses in the MBA program? So I'm having this discussion with the administrators in the MBA program and other faculty to consolidate, because we have JUMP, SPSS, SAS, R, and Excel all mixed together, and the students hate it. We need to sort of figure out how to make that happen. So that's one thing I'm dealing with right now. I'm trying to make the case that R lets you do classical regression and data mining and all this other stuff, and that's not something that's true of any of these other tools typically. Right? So there's actually no argument against it, except I'm the only assistant faculty on the core faculty, so I don't have any say. Trying to figure out this, there's been some demand from the students for SQL stuff. My thing is I'm not so sure it belongs in this course, so we're thinking about trying to figure out an elective, if we can figure out teaching capacity to cover that. That would be ideal, and there has been. So what I've been doing is I will sometimes have like an optional time they can show up, and I will do some SQL demonstration and show them the basics outside of class for those that want it. And then the last thing I'm trying to figure out now, and it sounds like I'm maybe plugging into Florin to see what he's doing right now on the IT security stuff, because I don't have that right now, but I'm thinking this is something that's pretty critical at the moment that's absent from our course. And I've been eyeing some cases, like the Target data breach case and the Apple versus FBI San Bernardino thing. This case is on this stuff that I've been sort of culling together to incorporate. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Any questions? Yeah.
One more comment. I've been talking to a lot of employers and recruiters, and what's really coming up across more and more is that they all want the graduate to know SQL. So I think that's actually gaining in popularity, sort of coming back. It used to be there in the 80s. So I would encourage you to see if you can keep it.
Yeah, so I'm not talking about removing it. I'm saying it's not there right now, but there is demand, and we're actually looking at adding an elective.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And you can actually do it inside R.
Yes,
You can. There are plugins. Yeah, you can. Yeah. I think part of the thing there is just the students really don't need to necessarily understand data modeling and anything else. What they really need to understand is how do I write a select statement to get the data I want.
Exactly.
Because really all they need to do to be somewhat independent in the organization to pull the data they need to do some analysis on. They don't need to manage the database.
Right.
So it can be relatively light, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah, they don't need to know normalization or anything.
But you have to do something with joins, outer joins especially.
Sure. Yeah. But it can be limited to select statements. That's the thing I'm saying. Yeah. Any other questions?
MBA was a course, an elective called Dealing with Data, MBA course.
Right. Oh, okay.
That also includes, other little more things, like scraping and.
So, do you teach this in the full-time MBA? Do you also teach this in the part-time MBA, executive MBA, or do you have different versions of this?
So I teach this in the full-time MBA. I don't teach in the part-time program, so I think the closest analog to my course is what Jason is teaching, and he teaches a bunch of this stuff does show up there. In the executive
Courses
MBA,
are quite different.
I don't think he's using, I don't know whether he's using R or not, in terms of the tools that he's using, but in terms of the content and the structure of the modules, that's relatively similar.
But generically speaking, Sanjay's asking an important question. Does the crowd sort of separate out full-time MBA from executive MBA in terms of content? Like, what's the differences?
I think the main difference is probably the focus on grades. The part-time MBAs are a little bit more willing to kind of explore these new tools and stuff because they're less worried about what am I going to get on my grade and is you know, McKinsey going to hire me, and they're more worried about can I use this at my company and add value. So it's a little bit easier to sell some of the stuff to the part-timers, I think.
You know, I just want to say this, right? A big picture point. We've been doing this workshop for 10, 20 years, and I see 3 different takes on the core course in the 3 presentations already. It's just unbelievable. We're not converging, we're diverging.
To me, it seems convergence, and I'm seeing the opposite. I think
Yeah.
To me, it's all the same thing. I mean, I think there's a lot of convergence. There's the core of like data, the core of platforms, right? The core of transformation side. I don't think it's that different. I mean, if you look.
It's similar topics from a slightly different perspective. It's
Right.
just,
I mean, you know, that
I think that what Vijay presented is a little bit different from what Florence presented. And Florence was, I mean,
So I look at that too. I just didn't dwell on it. I look at the art component also. The students love it. I just chose what to focus given the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Flora and I have been collaborating quite a lot actually on teaching materials. So they're
so is it the case that a lot of the core courses now are doing a lot analytics, a lot of analytics?
you have to expose that. I mean, it goes back to the earlier question. How we raised this, right? I mean, the linkage between IS and analytics. To me, like a lot of the value the companies have from the IT infrastructure is going to come from the analytics.
Yeah.
So that's the easy connection. When you say that, like, you know, you got all these systems, you know, we got to go back and look at the data and make decisions based on that, and analytics is a bridge to that.
We just heard from our career management center that a lot of companies looking for MBA graduates are pretty much thinking the analytics has to be in their pocket. And so the way to do that for everyone is you have to have it in the core. And then actual place is the CIS core.
yeah, I dropped quotes in there about McKinsey and Bain and everybody saying they're prioritizing analytics skills that they're hiring now, especially in digital operations.
And I can confirm also the SQL thing. We have it in the core. We have R SQL and we have all these. And the students liked it and the employers liked it.
Yeah.
So Gord, do they come into your class after sort of the course tags where they learn, say, Excel and Jump, I guess is what
They
you
use Jump for the most part in their business statistics course. I have them go through some things like I'm teaching them, you know, elasticity regressions and things like that, or how do you interpret a linear regression, and some of them aren't capable. So I think there's some issue as far as how practical and applied the business statistics course is versus how theoretical it is, and so this is a bit of a refresh for them. So that, I don't know, that's something specific to our body of students that they find that helpful. I don't know, that would depend on your curricular structure wherever you're.
So you know, Gord, you mentioned that every class you give them data and you do something in the class and so on, right? Hands-on. Is there any room in your course for the traditional Harvard case, you know?
We do that as
Harvard-
well, yeah.
So, like, what
I wouldn't-
cases
so-
what
so-
cases are you doing in this class?
So I wouldn't say that every single course has a data component, or every single module has a data component. It's frequent. It's like every other, right? So I can go back to my. So I'm using a lot of HBS cases in here, actually. So so like I mentioned, I use this into a QuickBooks case now to demonstrate platform openness and platform design concepts. What else do I have? We have the Air France case, of course, has data that comes with it. We have Star Digital case. I used to explain A/B testing
That's
and
very much
service.
analytics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the Ford Fiesta case when I explain social media strategy for a firm. Yeah, there's a crowdfunding case. I actually didn't use that this time. But yeah, so there are some sort of HBS style cases mixed in here too.
So, while I like everything that I've seen so far, one of the things that I see missing, and the reason I ask the question is because we're struggling with what we need to get into this component, is about technology decision.
Okay.
And none of us, including me, so I'm not being critical, have talked about it very much, which is how do you actually make decisions about investing in technology? Because what I hear from sort of employers is they have a real hard time with it. And at some level, that's what all sort of managers do, right?
Sure.
So I would love some input on sort of how other schools are dealing with this.
Gord, thank you very much.